I am very excited to be here today. My name is Emily Line. I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel focused on commercial real estate. I am geeking out because I'm here with two gentlemen who are industry experts. Drew Jankowski is with CREXi and is Senior Product Manager, and Steig Seaward is the VP with Colliers International, focused on research. So with that said, the reason I'm so excited is I represent the Realtors Property Resource, a wholly owned subsidiary of the National Association of Realtors. And we have the pleasure of working with both of these entities and helping the commercial real estate constituency. We've licensed data with CREXi, and our members love it. And we certainly have members that fall under the Colliers brand. So instead of belaboring all of this crazy good stuff, I'd love to just start and get right into the questions with Steig first, if you don't mind. Let's set the stage. We know that commercial real estate's the biggest asset class, and it's stagnant as far as proper fields, standardization, data sharing. We know that folks ask questions about why don't we have a database that has everything in it? But then there's the old question of, can it be cheap? And can I make sure that I have everything I need to be able to price properly? And then you also have the fact that you have folks in smaller markets that are getting into this industry, and they also have interests that are slightly different than the big markets and the big players. So with that said, Steig, would you like to set the stage for where you see the 15-year progression in commercial real estate?
Yeah, sure. So may even be longer than 15 years. I might be dating myself in terms of how long I've been in the industry, but certainly we have seen a big shift over the last, call it 25 years or so, where, in the very beginning, it used to be sort of the larger shops, the Grubb & Ellis, CBs, Cushmans. They all had a tribe of researchers that would go and they'd collect all the information. Once a quarter, they'd call the brokers and understand, what availabilities are out there and what's vacant. And each of those shops was doing sort of that same specific thing on a repeatable basis. And then we started to, as we sort of moved into the tech, the tech boom, we had players like CoStar that kind of came out and really began to aggregate a lot of that information. And then certainly as we moved into the tech boom, people saw how successful CoStar was being, and they were all trying to become sort of the next CoStar, if you will. The problem with commercial real estate has over the residential real estate is that there's really just no central repository for all of this information. Unlike the residential side's very organized, they have, multiple MLS structures, but by and large, what they're tracking is sort of consistent in terms of, a property comes on the market, it's for sale, then it goes under contract, then it's sold, and that turns into a sale comp. It's a little bit more complex on the commercial side, particularly when you look at the leasing activity where you have suites coming on and going off, and whether they're available or vacant and things like that. So about 15 years ago, there was an Oscar initiative where we tried to go and begin to standardize all of the terminology and the definitions. That, sort of pushed us forward, but we still have, NAIOP has their own set of definitions. BOMA has their own set of definitions in terms of what all these things are. And we're really just trying to get to, a general commonality so that we can begin to share this information more freely back and forth with one another.
So with that said, how do you see the landscape today? We know that we're in a space where our practitioners want things in one place. And we know that there's the desire and a lot of conversations around data standardization. But to your point, that standardization varies among different platforms. So where do you think that we have opportunities? And also, I'm taking notes because we aggregate data from 40 different commercial information exchanges, 4 or 5 national platforms, and we need help. Data normalization is horrific.
All right.
So what are your thoughts,
job
Steig?
And then some. Yeah. So we're moving towards this goal of trying to, have commonality. And as you mentioned in the beginning, real estate's sort of the largest asset class that's out there. But if you think about the visibility that we have within that industry, it's really not very good. You look at what's happening on the financial market, and anybody can go out there with a browser pretty much and understand what's going on with companies and their PE ratios and things like that. The more sophisticated users have, like the Bloomberg terminal, where they can go on, they can punch in some variables and find all kinds of information as it relates to the different, financial markets. But in commercial real estate, it really doesn't exist at all like that. And so we're really trying to struggle, and you have to go over here to get one piece of information. You've got to go somewhere else to get something, another piece of information. And then we're trying to just kind of cobble all that together on an individual level. And it's just not a very organized and systematic process. So, we saw an initial push during the tech boom. Then that kind of busted away. And now I think we're sort of seeing this second renaissance, if you will, of data really becoming to the forefront. And you're having data analysts really go and people are recognizing the value of information and the informed decisions that they can make off of that. And so what we're starting to see is that there's this transformation in terms of not only being able to collect that information, but companies like CREXi in terms of being able to push that information back out to companies like ourselves. So they're developing their APIs so that we can go in and grab some of that information that they're curating, and then we can ingest that into our internal platforms. And that's going to be a game changer, right? But the problem, as you mentioned right now, is that it's taking a small army to go and just grab all of those different data sets and try to begin to standardize all that information and get that to flow seamlessly into our own proprietary tools, as well as the other tools that, all the other vendors are using. It's just not an efficient model right now.
No, it's not. And you bring up the Bloomberg terminal, which is outstanding for the finance industry. You see information in real time. However, it's very expensive per terminal. So I'm just curious if you see price as being something that's going to be an interesting variable as we try to normalize data for the nature of different types of practitioners.
I think price will always be, to some degree, an important component, right? And I think what it's going to do is just going to kind of continue to separate different brokers. And, some people are willing to pay more money than others. And certainly the lower the price point, the more people that can join a particular platform. When you have more people looking at that information just organically gets better because you have more resources just looking at it, commenting and saying, hey, that's not right, that's wrong. But certainly, if you look at the overall price point of what, we might pay individually to a particular vendor, for them to go out and collect all that information, they're spreading that cost across all of their members. And so if we were to say, you know what, that really feels like that's too expensive of a price, it's still far cheaper than what we can go do ourselves individually. So I think there's always going to be, I think we'll always continue to recognize that, like, while we may not like the price increases that happen year over year, that we do recognize that it's far cheaper for us to go ahead and outsource that and have somebody else do it and monetize it by spreading that cost across everybody, instead of us just going to do it and kind of reverting back to the research model that existed, 25 years ago.
And I would also add, with modularity of data, if we can achieve a common data dictionary, it will actually free up, like CREXi, like other platforms that are providing the data, different pricing models to provide back to the brokers, the researchers, the buyers, the owners, whoever might be using that data. So it'll give us flexibility on how we're going to deliver that value and ask for compensation in return.
I think that's a great point.
We're paying for your time to standardize the information. So the faster you can get that, the better it would be for the industry as a whole.
Exactly.
Another conversation I know our team has a lot, and in fact, we've had it with you and team, Drew. who are we trying to problem solve for? I know from our angle, ours are definitely the brokers and the brokers who are realtors, but we can't stop the problem solving there. We have to understand that our brokers need to have access to tenants and to investors. So where do you sit in this and CREXi and considering that universe so that we do things correct and do things in a way that's productive going forward?
It's a really good question. From our perspective, right, the brokers, the buyers, the tenants, they care about two things really: coverage, right, which is the ability for the data to capture all the different types of assets and how they might be set up, and then completeness, right, making sure that those data fields are actually filled in. So that's kind of the job of the data dictionary itself in terms of the fields. On the technology provider side, it's how do I access that data? How do I share it between other systems? So those are kind of like the two different levels that I'm thinking about how we can solve that problem. And that's why we're here with RESO, right? Is to kind of move that effort forward specifically for commercial. We're leveraging it for a number of our data partnerships with MLSs across the country. But there are still a lot of fields, especially on the leasing side, where we don't have that coverage and the completeness yet that we want, that our tenants want, that our investors want. The analogy that I think of is, you buy the DVD and you can put it in any DVD player, right? You've got your listing and you want to put it in whatever, or your property record, and you want to put it in whatever system of record you're using. So that's the kind of modularity that we're trying to get to.
How do you guys handle the unique identifiers? Because I know that we have a problem when we aggregate, as I mentioned, all those CIEs, the national platforms, including CREXi, and then nearly 600 MLSs, which, P.S., there's a lot more commercial data. You mentioned the MLSs that are coming in because there's a lot more movement in these smaller markets. So what are you guys doing to clean up the data?
Yeah, it's a really hard problem. So you've got addresses, you've got APNs, which, by the way, can change and merge and split over time. So you need kind of the historical record of that. It's something that we're constantly working to try and reconcile and improve. Someone can mistype a address, and we've got to be able to make sure that our systems are reliable enough to reconcile that if we see it from two different sources. So there's no one single solution that's going to work. So it's something that we're constantly working to improve, especially as we add more of these data sources and these integrations.
As you continue to work, and this is a selfish question because it comes back to our population of realtors and doing a lot of testing and such, but there's differing degrees of commercial activity that's taking place. And we know there's nearly 50% of commercial practitioners who call themselves realtors who list with CREXi. And we also know that they have a need to want to have more standardization around fields so that we all offer easier ways to do valuations. Do you see an opportunity with the way that the residential industry is set up with the standardization around fields going forward through these types of conversations?
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely also a whole bunch of different use cases that we need to be able to capture with that information, perhaps separate versions of the data dictionary. Maybe land is its own versus a retail versus a lease. We may have a much larger diversity of different shapes of that data, but we want to be able to capture all of those different use cases for the data dictionary.
So with both of you on this question, so it's a free-for-all, I guess. The nature of our industry from a practitioner perspective has been, I I want to have access to everybody else's details, but I may not be so open about sharing mine, in particular surrounding leasing details. Do you think that the mindset, and this is for either one of you, is going to be shifting as we see some of the nature of the business calling for better technologies?
I mean, I think that we'll continue to see a shift in that mindset. Because think about this, like 25 years ago, the CBs and the Cushmans and the Grubbs, they had all of this proprietary information about the vacancy rate for a downtown area or the average lease rate for Class A space. And as that information became more commoditized and was easier to get, that information was no longer as a competitive advantage as it used to be, right? So right now, certainly what the deal points are for a particular transaction, brokers are keeping that information close to their vest. But if that information somehow starts to get more transparent and people are able to sort of readily collect that information, very similar to, the difference between disclosure on a non-disclosure state as it revolves around sale prices. In states where there's full disclosure, knowing what the sale price is really isn't a competitive advantage because you could just go out to the assessor's office and go grab that information. Whereas in non-disclosure states, people are holding on to that information just as tightly as lease comp information. So I think as technology kind of evolves and we start to see more of that information and an understanding of how that information is being used, right? The brokers don't want to tell you when their tenant's lease is going to expire because they don't want another broker to go poach that tenant and take them away from that. So we're going to have to solve, some of those competitive issues in terms of doing that. And if we can come up with a solution to that, then I could see that, more of that information could start coming out.
Yeah, and I think the standards conversation, allowing the sharing of that information much more easily and interoperability of systems, like if you make it possible, it's going to start happening more. And I think, seeing some more of that abundance mindset where if I share more, I'm going to get more in return on the back end of that interaction and build my network and have, more positive conversations is something that the standards can help encourage by just making it possible.
I completely agree. After all these years of being in this industry, I think it's a beautiful thing to watch us get involved in these conversations and sit at the table to do something that's needed and wanted. There may be some kickbacks in some of those areas, as we mentioned, especially as it pertains to leasing. But just having the opportunity for all of us to sit at the table through RESO and figure out these standards, it's time to get to work. And I think for anybody that's listening, watching us chat today, this is just scratching the surface on some very important topics. So I highly encourage you to get involved, ask questions. Big brokers, mom and pop shops, those that are with MLSs that have a growing commercial constituency, as well as companies like yourself, Drew, that are delivering really great listing platform activity tools. And, we definitely are excited to be partnered with you. So I thank you guys today. It's a great conversation, but like I said, it's just getting started. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Emily.